Okay, well, welcome everyone to Jesus is Just All Right, part two. And welcome whether you're joining again after coming last week or if this is your first time. It's really great to have you with us. This session is part of Living God's Future Now, the online festival of theology, ideas and practice from Heart Edge. And Heart Edge is an international ecumenical movement for renewal within the broad church, a network of churches growing compassionate responses to needs, cultural and commercial activities and congregational life. My colleague Ben is going to be posting information about Heart Edge and Living God's Future Now events in the chat towards the end of the session. And if that's information that's useful for you, then do use the three buttons at the bottom of the chat, the button with the three dots to save the chat to your own computer. This is the second in a four-part series. So last week we began reflecting on the fact that for over 50 years, pop musicians in all genres have explored the meaning and significance of Jesus in their music. And we're taking that resource and looking at what it says to us as Christians about our own faith and about ways in which we relate with those, particularly those who might be outside of our churches. And we're being led in doing so by Delvin Case, who is a composer, conductor, scholar, performer, concert producer and educator, multi-talented. And he's going to be leading us through the music that we're going to be listening to this afternoon. Please do maintain the mute on your mic until you're invited to speak. There will be lots of opportunities to share and contribute as we'll use some breakout groups. But when we're together in plenary, it minimizes background noise if you can mute, and it enhances our recording of the event as well. So having said all of that, by way of introduction, it simply remains for me to hand over to Delvin. Delvin, it's great to have you back with us, and we're really looking forward to this second session.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to Ben and to everybody who's been working on this project on Living God's Future Now, this series. And good to see some faces from last week. Thanks for coming back. We are going to be looking at another set of songs really from the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, these are all songs that were released on secular labels intended primarily for secular audiences. Some of the artists were Christian, some of them are not, but that's what's interesting about these songs is that everyone seems to have an opinion about Jesus. And today we're going to be looking at songs that use Jesus as a mirror to show contemporary Christians what we look like, which is really not very flattering sometimes. And that, for that reason, I think really important. Now, there are, a lot of songs that are sort of simplistic anti-Christian songs or atheist songs, but in my own work on studying this corpus of songs, and I found about 500 of them over the last 50 years, very few of them are really anti-Jesus. In fact, very few of them are really, well, I should say most of them that are actually, if they're critical about the church, or they're actually critical about the way Christians or Christendom has perverted or misinterpreted Jesus's true message, which is really interesting because the implication is that Jesus's true message is clear and available to anybody outside of the church, which is also a big challenge. I'm going to share my screen, and this happens to be a website that I created for this project, this larger project, and it's I can put it in the chat, I guess, in a moment. There we are. Grab that. Okay, it describes this project, but if you do visit this site, you can read about the different ways that Jesus shows up in pop music. And in fact, you can go down to, and there are playlists, and there's even a, what do you call it, a database where you can search for songs, etc. And so some of the songs we're going to be looking at today are songs in which Jesus appears as a judge, an apocalyptic judge coming at the end of time. And so you can actually listen to a lot of these songs, not the ones we're going to listen to today necessarily, but some of them, like this NoFX one, for example. And there are other songs where even you can even go down and find the songs that operate as a, see, I can find it right here, as sort of prophetically. And that's the thing we're going to talk about today as well. Finally, let me see. If you want to read more about the project in general, about all these different kinds of songs, there are links to a bunch of different articles online, and there's and podcasts, etc., where I talk about this, plus lots of links about this sort of interesting phenomenon of songs about Jesus that show up in secular music. So that's a pretty fun resource. You can even, if you know a song that I don't have in the database, you can actually add it as well using a what do you call it? There's like a little menu where you can type in the song and I can add it to the database. So for today, the question that I pose is, would Jesus wear a Rolex, that fancy watch? And that comes from a pretty great country song by that title. But here's the description, right? So what would Jesus think if he came back today? That's a question posed by artists working in genres as diverse as folk, hip hop, punk, country, and heavy metal. Whether written by Christians or non-Christians, these songs use Jesus' reappearance to challenge us to face the ways we have perverted his message. And we've all done it individually and as a church and a society. By showing us how those outside the church view the world Christians have created, these songs function prophetically. And like the words of truth uttered by reformers and martyrs in the past, these songs can inspire us to better follow Christ in our own lives and as representatives of the church. So the first set, we're going to listen to two songs like we did before together, and then we'll break into groups to talk about them. And the two songs are Would Jesus Wear a Rolex, a country music song from 1987, and then a more recent song called When Jesus Came to Tennessee. Now, I have found that country musicians like to write songs about Jesus, so they are presented more than those in other genres in general. And they also have great perspectives. There are two questions that I pose sort of for this part. And the first is sort of just a way for us to get into each song. So as you listen to each song, which sins of contemporary Christians or Christianity does each song highlight, right? If Jesus is the mirror, right? What's being reflected back to us? And then the second is, where the rubber meets the road. How are we complicit? How are we responsible in our own lives? And what can we do basically to make sure that this song doesn't get written again, essentially? So no one else has to write this song, if you will. Okay, so we're going to start with this. This is a really fun country music song that sort of jumps on the gospel train, if you will, as well. Here we go. I just love the John Lennon part. It's like, imagine if there's no heaven, right? And he's actually up there. I'm sorry. And this is one of the rare songs where when Jesus comes back, there's actually Jesus actually doesn't destroy the world. There's a lot of these songs where he's just like, I've had it, and so maybe a little bit of redemption is possible. Okay, so we're gonna break into groups for about 10 minutes, let's say. And just, these are the two questions in the chat. And last week when I was in my group, I tended to go song by song, actually. I thought that was helpful. You can do however you want. But, either way, we'll see you back in 10 minutes. Hey, everybody. Nice to see you. I really like those songs. I think they're funny in their own way, and we had a really great conversation in my group. I'm still laughing. I somewhat mentioned, I think it might have been Jane, about how it's just nice in that second song. It's nice to think of Jesus as someone who's fun to be with. Just there's joy, and literally joy in hanging around with Jesus, because he had a lot of friends and drank wine, and so that's kind of nice. Whatever you think of the theology or the message, there's an element of presenting Jesus in a way that's like a friend, and he was a man, right? And he was fun to be with, or else people wouldn't have hung out, basically. So, okay, so we're going to listen to that's the end of the fun, people. Unfortunately. So then, it's okay, I can't get over the John Lennon part. I love that. Now, the next two songs are really pretty, I think, theologically rich. The theme of the next two is this question: if Jesus came back, would we recognize him? Or another way to ask this is, how do we see Jesus today? Because if we believe that Jesus is present in the world in various ways, don't want to get too metaphysical here, but we see Jesus in our neighbor and in the body of Christ, the church, right? Would we recognize him? Or if Jesus were to come back, how would he manifest himself? This is a question of theophany, right? Like, how, if you encounter Jesus today, how would he be? What would he look like? What values and attributes would he embody? And then how would we react and respond? And of course, this is it's imaginary, but a lot of these pop songs that do that, take Jesus and put him in contemporary situations, do that in order to make a point. And look, if you've ever, anybody who makes a film about Jesus today is doing it, but and even when we read the Bible today, we're trying to imagine Jesus in our lives as the living Christ. These songs basically take Jesus himself, the man, and put him to here. So the first one is another country song by Colin Ray, an artist I don't really know, from '95. What if Jesus came back like that? And the second one is by the Pulitzer Prize winning musician and hip hop artist Kendrick Lamar, called How Much a Dollar Cost. And this is a really intriguing song, and it really digs deep into that second question. So yes, so let's listen to these. And the questions here are, again, for each song, how does each song's depiction of Jesus relate to the ways you think about it, right? Again, the question of, like, I never thought of Jesus in that way, okay? And then, of course, that begs the question, if we have a priori or an initial vision of who Jesus is, how does this different image compare, contrast, and why? And then I think, again, where the rubber meets the road, are there any arenas in your life where you could benefit from remembering that Jesus is reflected in the least of these, right? Spoiler alert, both of these songs present Jesus in ways that emphasize he was an outcast. And so you'll see that. So let's jump right in and check out these two songs. There's a fair amount of theology in there you might not notice at first glance, but it's interesting. Will Jesus come back? Will he accept us? Will he turn his back on us if he sees our hearts turning our backs on his other people? So it's pretty interesting. And again, this is a kind of like one of the least popular Christmas songs out there. Like, you're not going to sing this, like Christmas, but it's there. It's about, it sort of does the backwards thing. It's kind of cool. The last verse is the baby in the manger, right? And then the second verse is the orphaned, crack baby, right? And then the first verse is like the man, the hobo man. So it's kind of interesting how he slowly gets you into the Christmas story, which is kind of cool. The next one is really powerful. It's a little bit longer. It's very dense and worth a whole session itself. So here it is. So an amazing theophany there at the gas station, the big reveal at the end, right? Whether or not that drug addict was Jesus or not. This song really, it's not really the point of the song. So let's break into groups and let's take a little bit more time, just because this is a pretty cool collection of songs. So maybe we could come back at let's say 15 past. Hey everybody, good to see you. Yeah, there's so much going on in both of those songs. And I was making the comment in my group that that the country song, what if Jesus comes back, that it's really a Christmas song, and it sort of gets you. It ends with verse 3 about Jesus in the manger. Before that is Jesus as the crack baby, and before that is Jesus as the hobo, right? Which is, it sort of slowly brings you, and at the end sort of makes you realize it's a Christmas song at the end, which makes me think, why don't we sing the song after we sing Away in a Manger? When we hear Advent songs, right, and we think about this, or even Christmas songs, we think about the little tiny baby who actually was poor and vulnerable and about to be persecuted. So again, this would be one of these Christmas songs that I think would be great if we could use. Now, the last set of songs is, I'm going to share my screen. The last set of songs is actually includes a distinctly Christmas song. The first one is a song by the punk band NoFX, which is definitely, these folks are not Christians, but per usual, you would imagine they oftentimes create really satirical or powerful political songs. This is called "I'm Going to Hell for This One," and I think because they imagine it to be so, it's so critical of Christianity, and I love the image, right? Here he is. You never trust a hippie. That's actually what it says. You can see it. Yeah. So again, another song where never trust a hippie, right? Geez, the long hair, So I'll leave it up to you as to whether you think it's, because I don't think it's just critical. I think it has a lot to say. And the second one, as I mentioned, is actually distinctly a Christmas song by Jackson Browne. And this is the Rebel Jesus. And there's a great version of this with him doing this with this song with the Chieftains, the Irish sort of folk group. Now, these are songs that are not necessarily about Jesus coming back the first one is about Jesus, what would happen if Jesus came back. And the second one is, again, more about what happened when Jesus came the first time, but more like how Jesus comes back every year in Christmas and how do Christians respond. So it's a little bit not Jesus coming back at the end of time to judge us, but reminding Christians that Jesus comes back in our liturgical year, of course, every year. And it's how we react that makes the difference and how we respond. Okay, so here we go. The first song is pretty short, and the second one's a little bit longer. I'm sorry, before we go on, I just want to mention that in terms of the artists and the songs that I've chosen, I've tried to have a diverse group of musical styles. There have not been a lot of women present, and I recognize that. And I was thinking about, basically, if I could just say a couple of words about that. The number of pop songs out there about Jesus is extremely small compared to all the pop songs. And it turns out that when you look at popular music, the genres in which women sort of have equal sort of fame are pop music, sort of, and rhythm and blues, and folk music, and some country in some ways. But there are very few pop songs about Jesus in sort of dance pop music, and very few songs in rhythm and blues. So because of the sort of genre pressures, if you will, it already makes it really hard to find music by women that fit this category. Now, the nice thing is that in the next two sessions, we're going to be talking about prayer songs and songs about belief. And we see more folk songs there and more country songs particularly. And so it's a little bit, there are going to be some more songs by women. And again, I recognize there hasn't been a lot of gender diversity here. Partially it's because the male domination of genres like hip hop and rock and metal and punk, which is what I've drawn from, for what it's worth. Okay, so here are these two songs, again, by guys. So obviously the idea here being that, Christians might be emphasizing certain lifestyle strictures that, maybe Jesus, if he came back today, wouldn't be such a big deal. I mean, he liked wine, so why wouldn't he do ecstasy or cocaine, right? Or also, if Christians today are going to look at Jesus, you better put on the glasses that allow you to see him in a way that's rose-colored, right? But this is a testimony to Jesus's radicalness in a sense. I'm not sure if I agree with the whole song, but certainly a lot of us domesticate Jesus' message. I also wanted to point out a couple of things just you might not pick up on. Beginning of this, the idea here, BMI is the organization in the United States that pays royalties to people who use like your music. So the idea here is, as far as I can tell, that Mel Gibson from The Passion of the Christ, or Jesus Christ Superstar, they're profiting off Jesus's name. And so Jesus Christ is going to come back and wants the money that's owed him for the use of his image, and he's not happy about it. That's why he wants to kick Mel Gibson's butt. At any rate. Okay, second one, a very, very different song, and this is again a question about when Jesus comes back every year in our liturgical calendar, how do we respond and how should we respond? And we haven't, in my groups, we haven't talked too much about the way the music sounds, but this is, I think, really interesting that this is a song that's, it has very slow moving notes. It's very easy to remember, very easy to sing. It could be sung as a congregational, it fits. It could be sung as a group, in a group, maybe even at a church. I think it should be sung at a church in a lot of ways, again, at the Christmas time every year. So let's take some time to chat. Why don't we come back at 10 minutes of the hour, and then we can finish with a little bit of a plenary conversation, if that makes sense. Well, folks, we've listened to a lot of really provocative songs. They have certainly, the theme for me has been that when Jesus comes back, he's not going to appear the way we expect him. But I think a less metaphysical way to think is when we imagine Jesus today in our lives, what comes to mind and what values does he represent? But perhaps more important, how are we culpable? How are we a part of a society and a church that has misunderstood or perverted or deliberately changed his message to get what we want and to make him appear closer to who we think he is? So now there's a time to just for a few minutes as a larger group to just raise any issues or any questions you might have, any response to any of the songs that maybe a good question is, which of these songs was particularly powerful for you, or is there a line in any of the songs that will stick with you, and why? So anybody has any thoughts about that? Favorites, songs you liked, songs you hated?
I think my favorite one was the first one with Jesus Wear a Rolex. Is that right? Yeah. Firstly, because it was just quite upbeat and it was easy to kind of nod along to and just enjoy. And also because it just asked questions that I think we probably all asked ourselves at some point during our lives. That whole thing: do we give it all up and follow Christ, or or do we? Or what do we do in terms of stewards? I really like that one. I thought that was, sure, there was a bit of a prosperity kind of theme to it, but yeah, I think it applies to many traditions and expressions of Christianity. So yeah.
I must admit that was my favorite too, but I've heard it before, so I'm familiar with the song. Yeah. But I like it. I really do. I think, how can you stand there with all your wealth and yet expect others to give? And
it's
we've
not
got something to learn.
Yeah, and it's not just the TV preacher; it's all of us. I mean, that last song, right? Every year at Christmas, we sit there, and if we feel like it, we're going to give to a charity, but what if we actually raise the question about why there are so many poor? Then, Paul, did you have something you wanted to say? I'm sorry, I don't know if you raised your hand. And just unmute yourself so I can hear you.
Me?
Paul?
Or Paul? Mm.
I wasn't sure if Paul wanted. There he is. Yeah, great.
Yeah, yes, I'm unmuted. I'm sorry. Most of these songs have the perspective of
someone outside the church, those Christians, those preachers, and only I think the last one comes down that I noticed that comes down to a we kind of perspective. So that I think that makes that easier to hear.
And that's a great point. And along with that, I'm a musician. I tend to listen to music. There are very different music. Music creates different kinds of emotional landscapes or moods, right? And that last one, he does say something like, I'm not trying to ruin your Christmas. Everyone deserves to celebrate this. But the music itself is also sort of gentle and invites you into conversation. And not all these songs do it. Some of these songs the music is kind of funny sounding, right? That first song is sort of, it's straight up gospel, So I think the musical style also helps us engage in different ways. Some of these musical style invites us into conversation, and some of us, waves its finger at us. And sometimes I need to be encouraged, and sometimes I need someone just to yell at me,
Yeah, we talked about that in our group, and I learned a lot from it as a trainee preacher. I learned from it that what we need to give in our services is a challenge, but the joy of Jesus.
Absolutely. Do any of you have could any of you imagine using at least that last song in a church service at all? Like a Christmas time, or maybe that other one?
I've used it in a sermon. So I put it together with a track by Thea Gilmore from her Christmas album, which I think makes some similar points. Essentially about the sentimentality of the way in which the Christmas story is often told and celebrated, which obviously then misses the radicality of what was going on.
What was it called, Jonathan? What's the song called from Thea Gilmore?
The Thea Gilmore song is, I think, the Book of Christmas.
Thank you.
And it's on an album called Strange Communion.
Thank you.
How did that go over? Did you use it at Christmas time, Jonathan?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was probably in Advent rather than at Christmas, but yeah, I sort of topped and tailed it with the two songs and talked a little in between. Yeah, so, but I've not tried, getting people to sing it as a hymn.
Well, that other one, and Jesus Came Back Like That, that's even a little more intense, right? Because it really takes that baby Jesus and then imagines the crack baby, right? Which again, someone was saying in our group how that, Jesus was about to be subject to, infanticide and genocide, and he was poor, and so I didn't really think about the resonance between those two songs specifically, but it kind of makes a lot of sense. This has been great. I think it's fantastic. So I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts. I hope this has been interesting. I hope these songs are, work in your heart, because I think they really are prophetic in a lot of ways. In a sense, they really speak a kind of truth that we ought to hear, at least hear. The next two sessions are, for me, they're actually more powerful because they get more personal. If you can imagine that. The next session, next Friday, is about prayer songs. And I don't know about you, but I oftentimes have a difficult time praying, knowing what to say, right? How to say it. And the amazing thing about a lot of these secular songs about Jesus is that, first of all, a lot of these prayer songs use really remarkable and interesting language. Some are prayers that are almost like psalms, right? They're angry, but many of them are these honest prayers for guidance and salvation, in a sense. They use interesting words, but also we're going to encounter a number of prayers that are by people who, even in the song, say they don't believe in God. And there's nothing more Christian than praying to a God that you don't know exists, because that's the big question, right? And because for me, whenever you think you know God exists a certain way, that's an idol, but that's another story. So there's some really cool songs about how people praying to a God that they know is there in some way, but can't admit is there. And I think that resonates with me. And then in the last session is songs about faith. And similarly, songs where artists are asking the really tough questions about how can I believe? What do I believe? And we don't get a lot of these songs in church. We don't sing a lot of hymns like, I don't know if you really are there. Those aren't the hymns we sing, but we all feel that. And so these songs kind of do that, And so I hope you'll come back, because there's some really powerful songs in the next 2 weeks. Jonathan, I don't know if there's anything you want to say to finish up.
Okay, well, we want to say thank you to you, Delvin, for guiding us through today, and sharing all this music and sharing the challenge that comes through that. There's some really big challenges for us as individual Christians, and particularly as the church, amongst the songs that you shared with us today. So that's really helpful. Ben's dropping details of other events in our Living God's Future Now program into the chat. If you want, if you'd be interested in something similar that's using visual art rather than music, then we've got the last in our Inspired to Follow Art and the Bible Story sessions on Sunday at 2. We've also got a number of really interesting things in the program for the week, including a session on commerce and sort of pulling in the skills of business people into our church ministry, as well as the next in our transatlantic conversations, which is looking at information technology and the big tech companies. So those are well worth coming along to. And then the following Sunday, we've got our Vicar Samwells in conversation with a local rabbi. That will be the second in that series, which again is a fascinating conversation about Christianity and Judaism. So we would hope we hope to see you at some of those events in the coming week, but also look forward to seeing you next Friday for the third in this series. So thanks for everyone for all that you've contributed and shared, and we'll see you next Friday, if not before. All the best.